Hey, what's going on, my nerds and collectors alike? We are finally back again, reviewing the Spider-Man Retro Series Sandman. So taking a closer look here, obviously we have the old Spider-Man cartoon logo at the top there, with the classic bubble that we've been seeing with these packages for a while. A nice image of Sandman from the cartoon. We've got Flint Marko and his accessories in here, so it looks like we've got some sand constructs and an alternate head sculpt. Pretty standard for the Retro Series on the front. On the back here, you've got the swappable parts being shown. That same image of Flint Marko. And we've got his bio that says, a massive dose of radiation bonds petty criminal William Baker's body to sand, creating a massive threat to Spider-Man. Which, yes, he is also known as William Baker. I failed you, nerds. I'm sorry. Down here we've got your warnings, small parts, don't put it in your mouth, not for children under 3 years old. Legalese, all that fun stuff. Barcodes. The bottom here is just the bubble, as always. Now, personally, I open my packages and just toss them because I don't really have the room to store packages like this. But there's a way that you can keep these safe by just taking a small knife, usually a hobby knife, and slitting the sides down here and then just cutting across the bottom. And you could just take this out and then put it back in when you're done. But let's crack this guy open and see what he's about. Alright, so here we have Sandman out of his packaging and with his sand constructs on him. First things first, we do have a nice wash over the sand constructs, which is looking pretty good. The sculpt is a little bit muddy, but it looks about how you would want it to for a comic person made of sand. On this side we do have a fist as opposed to a large morning star. And we do have some sand that if you pose it down, it looks kind of like it's drooping a little bit. Do be informed that these sand constructs are specific to these arms, and the coverings for the flesh parts on his arms are actually oriented a very specific way to make sure that they are flush with the end of the wrists. We're going to take a closer look at his alternate head sculpt here, so we're going to go ahead and get in there. So as you can see, this is an alternate head sculpt where you could actually have a Spider-Man posed punching through his head here. And we even get a nice detail of a little bit of his eye left, because, you know, when he breaks down, that's just what remains, is his flesh form there. So we have a little bit more of a, not angry, just kind of annoyed expression here. More inconvenienced than anything that Spider-Man punched the side of his head off. But that looks pretty good. It's a nice cutoff between the sand and the flesh there. Paint's done really well. We do have his hair still, and on the back of the head you can see that we do have a little bit of paint mudding into the sand part there, but at the same time, not really bothersome to me, just because of how Sandman kind of works. When he breaks down, there's a little bit of him left, and it merges, so not upset by that at all. And we will go ahead and demonstrate here. Let's get the Spider-Man Classics Retro Wave Spider-Man there. So all you need to do is simply remove his hand. You're gonna place it against the hole in Sandman's head. And as you can see, if you turn his arm in that way, it sits fairly flush. And then you just take his hand and put it back on. So now it looks like Spider-Man has punched through the side of Sandman's head. So that's a nice little effect that you can use there. And then once again, you just pop the hand off. And there you go. So getting back into that, he does have an alternate head sculpt here. I know we're moving a little bit differently than we normally do, but I want to break him down before we get into articulation. So there's the alternate head sculpt, which is the base head sculpt without any sand detail on it. And then this one, he does look actually more angry, so he's got his teeth showing there. We've got a little bit of the pink paint coming up on the teeth, but, you know, it is what it is. The eyes on mine, luckily, are fairly straight. I have seen some that have come out very crooked, so it's nice to see that that's picked out fairly nice. Paint for the hair, a little bit muddy. I've got a little bit on the ear right there, but, you know. Other side, same thing. I do have a little bit of flesh coming through there. But it looks pretty good. And now for the sand constructs. Keep in mind that these are not on hinges, so when you are using these, do be careful. They are on the regular standard wrist peg, so definitely be careful when using these. Port them in with care. Don't try to move them around too much once you've got them there. And there's a little look at the sand construct covering the flesh tone. So as you can see, that's sitting fairly flush on the arm there. Flush enough anyway. I might actually have that on the wrong way. Let's see. So it's basically just a game of trying to figure out exactly where this pushes on, but at the same time you don't want to rub too much because there is just flesh paint over green plastic on this, and you don't want to wear that down too much. So you kind of want to find the shape, and as you can see right in there, before we go any further, there's an R marking that this is for the right arm specifically. And let's see here. That looks about right. And then, nope. So it's a guessing game here. Let me see if I can show you. If it'll focus. There we go. So it's a guessing game of trying to find the right orientation for that shape to sit on the arm properly. And it would seem that we have a winner. So when these sit flush, focus here, come on. There we go. So you can see that sits kind of flush in there, which gives you the opportunity to just take the peg, push straight in, and that will articulate. So if you want spikes on a certain side, it will still rotate in there. Just do try to be careful about that. Do also note that the sand constructs are a little bit heavy, so I have seen some people's figures, my shoulders seem to have their ratchets intact. Some people's I have seen where the ratchets are not strong enough to carry the weight of the sand constructs. They are also heavy enough to bring the weight of the figure forward some. So when you are posing him, if you're going to pose him with his limbs out, definitely add some backwards counterweight to that and try to fit that into your posing. He will be kind of hard to stand if you've got his arms just straight out. As such, he kind of just wants to fall over. So, you know, be creative with it. You can still, as you saw, you can still have sand constructs out in front of him. Just use them in a different light and try to pose around that. So say you want him hunched over a little bit. Get him posed up where he can still support the weight. Which I'm even having a hard time here, so add a little bit more crunch to that leg. Now it's doing it because it's on camera, but I was doing it a minute ago. There you go. So you can have him hunched forward with his sand constructs out. You just kind of got to play around with it a little bit. Just because these pieces are fairly weighty. And for the most part, this Sandman is just on the Luke Cage body from the Luke Cage and Claire Temple 2-pack, from the Netflix series, or even earlier from the San Diego Comic-Con box, I want to say in 2018, with the red-shirted Luke Cage. They also reused this body mold for Hydro Man in the Far From Home wave, so we've seen this body a couple of times. I definitely do like it as a Sandman body, though, because personally I don't want a large Sandman. I just want, you know, a decent-sized guy that comes with some sand constructs, a little bit of different options, which is what we've got here. So going ahead and just removing these comes off simply enough. As you've seen, you just slide those off. And then these two pieces are specifically for each other, so slide those to the side. And he also does come with a pair of flesh-toned fists, so that way when you're not using these sand constructs, if you don't drop it, when you're not using the sand constructs, you can just pour it in those hands and then have a regular arm, which is one thing that I know a lot of people, even from the previous Sandman Build-A-Figure, definitely wanted, was the option to have regular looking Sandman and then sand constructs to go along with him. Now on this side, as you can see, this peg actually sits more flush with its cover than the other one does, so just try to remember that the deep V cut here with that goes on the inside of the elbow, and it is snug, so just be careful when you're pulling these off. But like I said, keep in mind that the largest sand creeper there on this sculpt is what goes in on that elbow, and you should be able to slot this on with no problem. And this sand fist here is specifically for the left arm. As you can see, it is sculpted to be the left hand. If you really wanted to, you could use the sand construct hands without the sand cover pieces on, but keep in mind that all of the weight is going to then be supported by just this little peg. With these sand construct pieces covering the arms, it does offer support around that peg hole for these constructs, so you do want to be careful with that. Don't want to see anybody breaking their Sandman figures, because having a figure break on you is not a fun time. So definitely recommend using the entire sand construct piece if you're going to be swapping out those hands. And the new flesh hands fit in there just fine. These are the hands included. The flesh tone from the wrist to the hand is very different, and as you can see just from swapping out those sand pieces, I do have some paint rub there, and the flesh tone is actually thinning. I don't know how well it's picking it up on the camera, but with my eyes in my hands, just from a regular distance, I can tell that there is green behind the flesh tone and that the flesh tone is fading. So it is kind of sucky to see that the flesh tone is so drastically different from hand to arm. This side's a little bit better, so it looks like maybe this side didn't get as many coats of paint as this side got. This side there still is some green showing there, not sure how much you can see it in the camera, maybe right there. And the flesh tone is still off, but it's not as drastic as on this left arm. So, don't know what happened there, but it is what it is. Getting into articulation. Sandman's head is just on a ball joint and a hinge, as opposed to the dumbbell joints we've been seeing with a lot of the newer figures. Personally, it doesn't bother me. You can still get some tilt with this head sculpt, because the head is actually kind of a little bit soft. It's not super soft, but it's soft enough that, you know, you got a little bit of give in there. So it sits on there pretty nicely. Gives you a little bit of tilt, not as much as obviously a dumbbell joint would, but hey. He does hinge up, so he can look up that far, which is pretty good. So you got Spider-Man swinging over him. He can look up, grit his teeth at him, show you know he's upset that Spider-Man's there. He can bury his chin, so he can look all the way down, which is very nice. And of course, he has swivel. His arms are on the disc hinge. Really the only thing articulation-wise I would have liked to see with this figure is butterfly joints. I think that would have been pretty cool, but for the body that they used and how well it all looks together, I'm not too terribly upset with it. I can still get pretty much what I want. Do note that the arms are a little bit gummy, so when you're articulating this guy, try to grab from the bicep to the trap instead of down here at the hinge, just to ensure that you don't shear off that peg that's in there. But his arms do go out not quite 90, so a little disappointing there, but hey, high enough. And then, you know, you can also fake it. So say you wanted them to articulate a bit more. And there's that gumminess I was mentioning. You can see that there's give in there, which makes me a little bit nervous. But, you know, you can also fake it, so you can do that. Obviously, he has a 360 rotation, and the shoulders are slightly ratcheted. He has a bicep swivel, and pinless joints on the elbows. Strangely enough, not on the legs. So I know that they sculpted new arms for this, simply for the sculpt of his shirt there. Would have been nice to see them retool these legs and make them pinless for future usage, or maybe use the jeaned legs from the Fox series Wolverine figures, because they did also come with legs in jeans, basically. He's just wearing brown jeans on this, which I think they're supposed to be corduroy, but obviously this is the sculpt they had. I'm not upset about it at all. It just would have been nice to see pinless on those knees, but I'm going to stop right there. Double jointed elbow, which bends in very nicely. And his wrists are on a swivel, and again, only the flesh-toned hands have a hinge in them, so they both hinge in and out. Again, Sand Constructs is just a static peg, so do be careful with those. He has an ab crunch that crunches only that far, which is pretty disappointing, honestly. You'd think with the kind of curved cut we had there, we'd get a little more than that, but that has been a known issue on this body mold since we first got it. He crunches back roughly the same amount, so you're not going to get a lot of movement there. A diaphragm joint would have been nice to see, or maybe a diaphragm joint with a hinge, kind of like how we got with the Retro Spider-Man. But hey, that's nitpicking. I still like the figure. You do have a waist swivel, which is nicely cut between the shirt and the pants, so that way you don't have any breakup there. His legs kick forward almost 90, ever so slightly off of 90 degrees. They do not kick back at all, as they are blocked by the sculpt there. He kicks out roughly 45 degrees, probably more like 35. Not too much, but this is also Sandman. I don't expect him to be doing some high-rise side kicks. He has a thigh rotation, double jointed knees, which Whoosh Robo will be happy he can kick his own back. And he has the ankle hinge here, which is hindered by the sculpt of the pants. So you can only hinge forward that amount, back that amount. I'm sure if you were cheeky with it, you could probably force it, but that would also put some stress on the peg in there, so I wouldn't. Just be careful. You know, toys these days, a little bit fragile, and you gotta be careful with them. And we do have ankle pivot, which is very nice. We do get some good movement out of that. Going into something else that people might be interested to see. So when this Norman Osborn head sculpt came out with the first retro wave for the Spider-Man line, they do have similar hairstyles, and so I know people were wondering if we would reuse this head sculpt as perhaps a Sandman head sculpt. As you can see, the head is a good bit smaller, but oddly enough, the ball peg and the hole are the same size. So it will peg on there and sit on there just fine. It just does look kind of odd because the head is such a smaller sculpt compared to the sculpts that we get with this body. So it does look pretty tiny on there, but I'm sure you could fudge it with camera angles or something if that is something you really do want to do. But let's get into some comparisons here. See, now he doesn't want to stand up at all. He's just fighting me now that he's on camera. Firstly, let's go ahead and compare him with some other villains. Here we've got the Shocker, which is on that old Bucky Cap mold. And there's Electro from the Spider-Man Retro Wave, which is on that slightly bigger mold, but not quite as tall. So as you can see, the mask makes him taller, but his head is actually stopped right about there. So Electro is a little bit shorter than Sandman. Getting Shocker and Electro out of here. Here we have the Green Goblin from that Spider-Man Retro Wave, which is where the Norman Osborn head sculpt came from, obviously. On camera, they look roughly the same height, but Green Goblin is about half a head shorter than Sandman here. And yeah, mine has been customized to make it look a little bit better, make it look more like a mask. But there's that. And then we all know that Sandman is part of Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery, so what would Sandman be without his adversary, the Retro Series Peter Parker, Spider-Man? And just because, here is the Spider-Verse Miles Morales, as well as the Spider-Verse Gwen Stacy. As you can see, he is taller than all three of these spider-themed heroes here. So he does still have a good size on him. He's not huge like the Build-A-Figure was, but he does have a good size to him. So nice and imposing. Overall, I do like the figure a lot. I do have some nitpicks with this one, so roughly a rating would be closer to 7.5, maybe an 8 for the figure. But I still, in my opinion, think that this is the best Sandman that we've gotten from Hasbro. And if you're looking for a Sandman for your collection, or you're looking for a different Sandman to your collection, if you have the Build-A-Figure or the San Diego Comic-Con version, I definitely think this guy is worth a pickup. Happy collecting, everybody. And before we go, as always, I want to mention that this channel is not for anybody under the ages of 13 years old. YouTube guidelines update every day, and we got to make sure we're staying with them. Happy collecting, everybody. Stay safe.